Hello, everybody. This is Keith Caldwell with Failure to Plan. I'm here with Ryan Platt with a special needs plan. Ryan, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Keith. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. I'm here in beautiful California, and I know you are in.
North Carolina.
Excellent. Very nice. Very nice. So, Ryan, for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure thing. The company name is a Special Needs Plan, and we have been working with families all across the country for approximately 9 years now in helping them plan a secure future for their child with a disability, as well as kind of for the whole family. So our big why, if you kind of say, is independence. And when we think of independence, we think of lasting independence for everyone. We kind of call it life. And so everything we do for a family is kind of colored with that lens of independence, whether it's providing the best life possible for the adult or minor child that may have a diagnosis and a special need, whether that's providing peace kind of for the parents, or whether it's also providing the fact of siblings always kind of remaining siblings, right, and not having to necessarily have the responsibility later, whether it's financial or caregiving for their adult sibling later in life.
Right.
So kind of everything we do is colored with that why of independence. And so for me, I've been doing that for 9 years. My background is as a financial planner, and then continued to educate myself and became a special care planner, and now another designation called a chartered special needs consultant.
Excellent, excellent, Ryan. Now, you and I have been on a series of these interviews, and we're just going to continue this dialogue, and I'm very, very thankful for that. I'm Keith Caldwell with Failure Plan. I'm a parent. I'm not a financial planner. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a life insurance person. I'm just like the people who would be listening to this and wanting to learn about it. I woke up one night with in a sweat, thinking, what's going to happen to my child if something were to happen to me? And I didn't really have an answer. So that's the purpose for Failure to Plan, is sort of to help other parents get off the fence and get our heads out of the sand and come up with a plan of action to provide for our kids when the day comes we're no longer here to provide for them. So it's not a sexy topic, but it's a necessary topic. And that's why I'm here and chatting with you, Ryan. So if you don't mind, let's dig right into our discussion. And I know today's topic is essentially short and long-term risk. As you know, I have a 10-year-old son with autism, and I don't really understand all the aspects. So can you describe what some of the short and long-term risks might be?
Sure, absolutely, Keith. I think you kind of hit the ball on the head with what you just initially said about kind of one of those short-term risks. Is just, and I don't, and please don't ever take this as disrespectful to a parent. I am one, but sometimes one risk is us parents can kind of get in the way of kind of getting this kind of plan done, because as you said, it's not a sexy topic, and I'll go even farther than that. It's a difficult topic.
Right.
It is a difficult topic to sit down, because also everybody's family is different. Right? You might have two parents who are together, and it's difficult for them as a married couple sitting down and talking about these topics of, well, shoot, if one of us is gone, if both of us are gone, oh my gosh, what government benefits are going to play a role? What finances are going to play a role? Who's going to be the next caregiver? And then you layer on, other family structures where, like we said, there's a mom and dad, they're divorced, and getting them to talk about what's going to happen can be even, it is, the challenge just sometimes can seem insurmountable. So one of the risks, probably the biggest risk that I talk about that is the most short-term risk is avoiding it.
Head in sand?
It is just not doing it.
Right.
Because it is a challenge. And I think one of the things that hopefully we can do together, Keith, because I know this is one of your passions as it is mine, is as we do these segments together, continue to do them, is to just educate folks about, the different pieces of it, and that it can be developed into a process for them, so that, the old adage of how do you eat an elephant? Well, it's just one bite at a time. We just have to get the spoon out and start eating, right? But we have to know where to start. And I think that's probably the biggest risk that I think about, because we just don't know where to start as parents in this kind of a planning, because it can seem so big.
Right.
And so that's why I'm excited to do these items for you, and with you, not for you, but with you, so that we can have people educate on what's important, so that then hopefully parents can feel more empowered to take that first step and to start to get things in place for their child and for their family.
Okay. So the head in sand scenario of where a parent doesn't do anything because they don't know what to do is a good short-term risk. You have any ideas about good or what examples our long-term risk might be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I should probably add a couple of short-term risks on there. I mean, I think one, not only kind of avoiding it, but just, sometimes we don't understand, and well, not just don't understand, we just don't know where the development of our child's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, and your son's 10. We have some families that come to us when their children are 4. Different diagnoses have different developmental scales, so to speak, and some are really up in the air. So for a lot of families that come to us, parents are like, well, I don't really know, what my child's going to need out in the future yet, because I don't know where their development's going to start or where it's going to end. Or where it's going to plateau, not end, but where it would plateau. And I just had a family come in the other day, and their child's 12, and I said, well, what's different about right now? What kind of brought you in now to talk about this? And the mom was very honest, which is always what I appreciate. And she just said that he's not as far along as we thought he was going to be at this point, and I think we've just come to the realization that if something happened to us, we really need to have things in place, because he may need support. Right. And that was a really, I really applauded her during our meeting, and I applaud her now for not necessarily realizing it, but kind of taking that step and saying, you know what, I don't really know, but I'm concerned that it's not going in the right direction, so I'm going to take some action about it. Which, that was really huge. I mean, that was a huge thing for her to do, and very difficult. So that's one risk. We just don't know what the development looks like, and also the risk of doing planning and understanding that development may change. Mm-hmm. So the plan you put in today, if your child is 4, 5, 10, 14, or 20, it may change 10 years from now because of their development. So that's kind of that's one of what I kind of call also a household risk, right? That's kind of a micro risk that's in the family itself. Mm-hmm. So we don't really know what that development's going to be, and because that's a risk, the plan that families need to put together needs to be very flexible, right? Because we don't necessarily know exactly what that development's going to be. Right. But you can always plan for, okay, if we do need support at a certain level, then at least we can figure out what we need to do. And if it needs to change, then adapt to that change going forward. When we think of long-term, that's a short-term risk. Another short-term risk in terms of this kind of planning in general can kind of be, and I know you're probably not going to tell your whole story today, but folks can look up our prior conversations about them. But some of the other risks are, all of a sudden the parent is gone. Right? Kind of like how you woke up in the middle of the night saying, I'm gone, now what happens to my child? Well, that's a major short-term risk, right? Of saying, okay, I'm gone, what happens? Or I had a stroke, or I got hit by a car or had a heart attack. And,
Right.
and now I can't provide the support that I was doing before. And that's a risk to that child's independence, but also the entire family's independence. And so those are kind of short-term household risks, I would say. If we kind of move to more long-term risks and also kind of what I kind of consider macro risks, so kind of bigger outside of our household that we don't really control, is certainly one that probably everybody on the line is either familiar with or understand that they're out there at some point, but government benefits.
Right.
And certainly in California you have Medi-Cal and certain things, and other parts of the country they have different pieces to that. But for many states and for the federal government, obviously we know where most of our governments are fiscally. They're in the red, meaning they don't have any money.
Right.
Right? And so that's a major risk for our families, because a lot of these support needs or the things that we're planning on, there are resources that I kind of call that are shared, right? There's kind of a shared responsibility if you build this plan the right way, where you're almost making the government a partner with you to kind of get some of their resources, and you're designing yourself in a way that you can do that. So one of the macro risks we need to understand as we start to plan and put this in place is, well, what happens if government benefits change? How does that impact my child's life and the services I receive? And what does that mean on a financial side? And how does that impact either myself, because I'm the caregiver doing that, and my ability to earn an income outside of being a support person for my child? Or how does that impact that future guardian when I'm not here anymore as well? And so that's kind of a macro risk that we don't control, but one that we can understand, and then kind of assemble a strategy to make sure that the plan doesn't fall apart if that does happen.
Ryan, that makes me want to ask a question. I know we've talked about this in the past, but I want to make sure we cover it here as well. There is a risk of doing it wrong. I know that some people say, well, I've got a brother or cousin who's a financial planner, and we'll go ahead and hire him because we don't want to talk to Ryan. We don't know Ryan. We're going to call our brother who knows our son and does it. There is a risk of doing it wrong, because I know that you and Bernard Crooks with Littman Crooks, had talked about examples of parents who went the wrong route and didn't hire the right professional, and things were not done properly. And then when they're gone and their child is most vulnerable, these things are having to be cleaned up. And they're not only expensive, they sometimes disqualify the child from services that he or she needs to survive, or government benefits are providing for them to live in a particular location. And all of a sudden, because the plan wasn't put together properly, now there's an issue for this child, and you're not there to take care of it. You've got subsequent caregivers who may or may not have the same vested interest that you as a parent would have. So that's why I think there's a risk of not bringing in the right people to help with your overall plan. You wouldn't hire an eye doctor to do a heart surgery, and you shouldn't hire a general practitioner to do a special needs plan. Am I right?
Right. I do agree with you on that, and Bernard Crooks and I did talk about that during our January conversation that we had with you, and it is a specialized area. So, and one thing that we've created, because we've had that question before, is we've created a little guide booklet that people can grab from the website, and it actually has interview questions for professionals. So if you think you have somebody that you want to work with, and usually in this area of special needs planning, you really need two highly qualified professionals. You need kind of a financial professional that knows what they're doing, and you need an attorney that knows what they're doing.
Are you an attorney?
An attorney.
Are you an attorney?
Am I an attorney?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Nope. So we have attorneys that we work with in the specific locations where our families are. So one of the things that we do for our families, because we work with families all over the country, but attorneys have to be specific to each state.
Right. That
So
makes
they
sense.
need to have a bar. They need to be barred in each state, and understand there are some federal rules that need to be followed, but
Hmm.
then there are also some state specific ones. So we really need to find an attorney that's specific to the state in which you live in, to make sure that those legal pieces are really put together appropriately.
Right.
So you're right, and I always use kind of that same example you did. If your child was diagnosed with a brain tumor, would you go to your pediatrician, and say, hey, he's got a brain tumor, because the pediatrician, and the pediatrician says, you know what, I went to medical school, I did a rotation on that back then. Why don't I just take care of this completely? I'll do all the tests. I'll figure out what kind of therapy we need, whether it's radiation or chemotherapy, and then I'll do the surgery to remove it if we need to do that too. A pediatrician, one, would never do that,
Right.
because they realize that would be malpractice and shouldn't be done.
Right.
And us as a medical consumer for our child would also never allow that to happen,
Right.
because we know that's not what they do all the time.
Hmm.
And we want to go to that, neurologist and neurosurgeon that works with children with the exact issue that my child has, because they've seen it before and they've done it before, and we have the best chance of it working with them.
Hmm.
And so it's the same kind of situation that you mentioned, and we don't normally transfer that line of thinking when we think of kind of planning, when we're thinking financial and legal, right? We just think, okay, well, a financial person can do it and a legal person can do it, right? Because that's what they do. So we just don't usually transfer that when we're thinking of this, and this is one area that's a specialty. There are certainly other ones in the financial and legal world as well, but this is one where, like you said, you don't want to have it done wrong, because again, it can cause not only issues for your child and their support services, especially if they're receiving them through government benefits sometime in the future, but also for that next guardian, which could be your other child or a cousin or your sibling, as a parent, the aunt and uncle, who have never even dealt with these things before, and they need to figure it out.
Right. I met with someone recently, and I was surprised, but I guess maybe I shouldn't be surprised after looking at this for so long. The couple I only met the father. His son was 40-something years old, still living at home, and he'd been involved in special needs community for 30 years, but he hadn't done a single thing. When I asked him some questions about special needs trust and letters of intent and some of the things we're going to talk about later and we've talked about in the past, his eyes glazed over. And I said, this is amazing. I mean, this person's in his 70s, his 40-year-old child is living at home with him and his wife, and he hasn't considered the inevitable thing of that one day he's going to be gone, and all his worst-case scenario things are going to come to fruition. So there's a risk for that, too. I just think that people sometimes have an inability to think and contemplate some of those things, and I was really shocked by that. So part of what I'm so excited about is that we're going to give people a plan of action of things that they can do to help protect that. So I like that.
Right.
That was just an aside. Is there any other long-term or short-term risks that you wanted to chat about, Ryan?
Yeah, I think another kind of long-term risk that we need to understand. It's almost the opposite side of government benefits, and here's what I mean by that. When we think of when we as the consumer or the family think of government benefits, we think of a resource coming into us, right? We're getting a resource. It's a service that we're receiving, that we're not necessarily paying for, but it certainly helps us financially, because then we don't necessarily have to pay for it, right? If we're getting therapy or a support team or whatever that is. Well, for the government, think about what it is for the government. It's an expense for the government because they're paying for it, right? And when we think about income for the government, where does the government get their income from?
From our taxes.
Taxes, right? And when we as citizens think of taxes, what do we think of it as? It's an
expense.
Right, because it goes out the window. So we're in the exact opposite frame of mind than the government is with those two pieces. So not only is what we see as a risk macroeconomically is government benefits could be reduced, and I know in some places they have been, certain hours of support services, certain hours of therapy, certain hours of different types of government programs just because of where governments are fiscally.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue with where governments are on a fiscal basis is the fact of, could taxes go higher in the future? Right. And why is that important? Well, when we think of tax rates, just for most people in the country, we're at the third lowest point ever in our country's income tax rate history. Since 1907, since we've had income taxes, we're at the third lowest point ever. And since the 1950s, we've been in a declining tax environment for the most part. So the question is if the federal government and state governments are in the red, is it possible taxes will be higher in the future?
Yes.
And if it's possible, that's a risk to our scenario depending on where we are saving our money, not only for yourself, but to then transfer some of that money to your child for the rest of their life's needs. So one of the risks is not understanding how taxes work over the rest of your lifetime as a parent, and then over the rest of your child's lifetime when you're not here anymore. And then understanding how taxes work inside of a special needs trust with certain accounts, because they'll work differently than they work for us as individuals outside of the trust world. And so certain accounts, when we're using them, may be good for us, and they may be what everybody tells us to do. But when they go to the special needs trust, some could get taxed possibly at 50% of their value.
I know, that is amazing to me.
It really is. And so if we don't know that, that's a major risk to making sure that our child and ourselves have enough resources to live with as much independence as we can.
Right.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I was just going to, and that risk kind of goes, you know, that and the government benefit risk are kind of siblings together.
You know, that brought up something related because I've seen it happen here in California. There's something called in-home support services, and we were cut last year. And in-home support services provides funds for, I don't know technically what it does, but it just provides funds for people who have a disability or need some support services. Mm-hmm. They cut it by 7%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but you know, if you're counting on that and needing that, that cuts. And now we're fighting hard to try to get that restored, and the likelihood of that happening is very remote. But it brings up the question of, I don't want to call it a taxpayer revolt, but you know, if the government's income is predicated upon taxes people are paying, if people who don't have children with special needs say, hey, you know what, I don't want to keep paying all this money, and for things that don't benefit my family in particular. And I think, you know, we as parents, we need to play in the political game. I know that's not your area to talk about, but really we can't sit on the sidelines and just let things happen, because this IHSS reduction is one of them. There's been some other things that have happened recently that are like, we have to pay for deductibles and co-insurance and co-pays for services that we used to get for free or paid for by the government. So there's these little erosions that keep happening all across the board in the legislative field that we're not even paying attention to. So that just made me think about that. That's why I brought it up.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? That's one of those macro risks that we need to understand and consider as you're putting together your household and family plan. And the same thing's going on in North Carolina and many other states. Mm-hmm. With the new state budgets and them looking at, okay, what are the Medicaid or Medi-Cal overruns, and you know, what does that look like, and how do we handle that, and what services are we going to cut? And so those same things are happening in many, many places. And like you said, you're right. And you know, I mean, almost every parent I talk to is definitely their child's best advocate. I mean, there's no doubt. There's nobody better, because nobody has as much love for their child than the parent does. And parents are going to fight and fight and fight and fight. And we usually see that fight at the local level more because it's so apparent, right? Whether that's fighting for getting some type of medical service, or whether it's fighting the school system for, you know, getting services in school and being in a certain classroom and being at a certain school, whatever that is. I mean, you see the parents, their passion is fantastic. I think, like you said, Keith, because the legislature is farther away from most of us, because it's only located in one part of the state, in every state, that can be a little bit removed from where we think it impacts us, but can have a drastic, like you said, long-term impact, but also short-term for those families that saw that 7% cut, or that's those small erosions that you mentioned. That's important to stay engaged. And so one way that I would recommend folks be engaged is, you know, and you have to forgive me, you know, I don't know the name of every single ARC in every state, because some of them aren't the ARC of you know, California or the ARC of Nevada. They have a different name, but I know across the country many of the ARCs are very much into the advocacy area at a state legislative level. So what I would always recommend is get connected to either your local ARC or your state ARC, because they will send you out these legislative updates about what's going on. And in North Carolina, it was great. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be on the board of the ARC of North Carolina, so, you know, I always give the ARC a plug because I think it's a great organization.
I do too.
At every level. But the you know, I got a legislative update, and the great thing about what they do in North Carolina is they send you to a link that you put in your zip code, and it pulls up your representatives right there, and they give you the letter to send. It took literally a minute. Right? And so it doesn't take a lot of time, but it's just like you were mentioning, Keith, why we're doing this is to get connected, stay connected with a community, so that you can do these action pieces that in the long term are really gonna have a positive impact on your family and your child. Right.
Well, I don't want to go too far astray because that's a whole new discussion.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. I agree. And the ARC, as opposed to some of the other organizations, I like them because they encompass all disabilities. There are some very vocal organizations that represent autism, etc., but they only represent autism, as opposed to the ARC, which is all disabilities they consider and factor into their evaluation. So I like that. So I wanted to just to make sure, because we're getting close to our time, to make sure that you had covered all the long and short-term risks that you wanted to sort of discuss. Make sure we're not missing anything today.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely big ones. I mean, again, you know, other ones that are going to be important, you know, I kind of call it longevity risk. And again, that's always an interesting to think about, because, you know, that's that crystal ball one. And longevity, what I always think about is how long are we all going to live, and how long is our child going to live? That can really be a tough one to kind of figure out, obviously, because none of us know the answer to that. But to understand that if we live longer, what does that mean for our own planning? What does that mean for our child's planning? And to just consider what things happen when we do live longer, right? So for parents, and parents at different ages are going to see this more than other parents, right? So as we all get to age, if we all live long enough, what I always say is life is a absolute circle, right? We come in needing 100% support in this life, right? We need somebody to, you know, burp us, feed us, change us, everything. And if we live long enough, we end up at that exact same point. And so that has to be at least thought through as you're putting together this entire plan, because remember, what's unique and complex about a plan for all the families that we reach and that we're talking to today is that it's over 2 lifetimes.
Right.
Right? We're doing over 2 lifetimes. So we have to get through the parent's life and all the things that could happen to you, and then we have to understand all the pieces that could happen to your child as well.
Right.
And so one of those is that longevity risk, and just understand, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that those things can be taken care of, and our child as well.
Right. That's excellent information, Ryan. I hadn't really thought about that piece, but to plan for not only my lifetime but for my child's lifetime is part of my requirement as a parent of a kid with special needs. So anything else that you wanted to add before we close out for the day?
I mean, I think that's a pretty good list for a day. We can certainly touch on a couple other ones, but I think that's a pretty good list for us to chew on a little bit.
Well, I know we've got some every 2 weeks so 2 Fridays from now we're going to be having another discussion, continuing just a different segment of the special needs planning aspect. So
yes.
We will talk about that. Ryan, do you have anything else you want to close out with? Any more plugs? And by the way, I want you to send me the link to your guide booklet so I can include it in the community so people can access it. That one that asks for interview questions.
Yeah,
and also put a link into the ARC so that people can find out more about that organization. Because I agree that it's a tremendous organization that does great work here in California as well. So right. I'm excited about that. Whatever we can do to support those guys in supporting us. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I just want to say again, I think as I always do, my gratitude to you, Keith, for really picking up quite a mantle and having such a passion to support not just your family and not just your son, but as many families as you possibly can. So it's a pleasure to kind of partner with you to do that.
You know what's interesting about that, and I'll end with that, but is if I can help just one family move that much closer towards figuring this out, then I just think it's all worth it. And this takes a lot of work, as you know, and yeah. I don't get paid for it, and that's not the purpose, but it's just helping families with some of these tough discussions and forcing them to have that discussion within themselves and within their family, I think is really helpful. So I'm encouraged, and anything I can do to help that is what I want to do. So Ryan, again, I want to thank you for joining us and spending your time. I know you're a very busy person, and we appreciate that. So thank you, and I will see you at the top.
You got it.